I grew up in Little Falls, Minnesota. I was the oldest of 4 boys. Upon graduating from high school in Little Falls, I went in the Air Force. And as a lot of my friends were heading off to local schools and universities, I'm going to boot camp. And I'm really glad I did that. I spent 4 years in the Air Force, and it was a good run. I got stationed in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And that's where I became familiar with the University of North Dakota, where I graduated in 1984. I actually met the founder of Marco while I was at the University of North Dakota. He was 20 years ahead of me, but Gary Marsden, who was our founder, was auditing a class. And he happened to be sitting in, and that's kind of how we met. My wife, Melinda, and I, we have 4 children, and we have 6 grandchildren. We get to see each other often. We spend a lot of time together. They all live kind of around the area. This is the community I live in now, St. Cloud. We raised our families here. This is still the homestead. This is the home front here. After graduating from the University of North Dakota, Marco was my first job, and really my only job, out of college. I started here in 1984, and I started as a sales rep in office furniture. I was in various leadership positions, all in sales, and I had a pretty good understanding where my skills were at. Pretty good in front of the customers. I think I did a good job attracting and keeping good employees, and still to this day I consider myself a salesperson, I guess. I was promoted to president and had been CEO here and or president for the last 15 years, and then I retired just 3 months ago, so not long ago. And I'm really enjoying that phase of life too. It's been great. Giving back to your community, being a good corporate citizen, can happen a number of different ways. If you're doing your job right in corporate leadership, you're setting a good example. And I'd like to think, over those years that I were here, 37 of them, that I did a pretty good job of setting a good example for what good looks like in actively participating in your community. When you give back to your community, if you do your job right, lots of people will give back to the community. You know, selfishly, what I learned about that too, people like to buy from good corporate citizens. People like to work for good corporate citizens. I think that our success as a corporation, we brought a lot of people with. And it wasn't about a few key executives. And it was about a lot of people having an opportunity to develop their careers. We had there's probably 160 people working here at that time. Today there's over 1,200. During my tenure, our average annual growth rate compounded annually about 19% every single year, top line, and more than that on the bottom line. So we had a very profitable long run of top end growth and bottom line growth. That makes things more fun. If the numbers are good, the rest of it seems to fall into place. We had one of the most successful employee-owned companies in the country. We shared the ownership of the company. When we sold our business back in 2015, we had 600 shareholders. And probably the single biggest financial event ever in St. Cloud, Minnesota. I don't know for a fact, but certainly one of the biggest. On that day, in October of 2015, we created about 100 millionaires of very average people like myself that went to public school systems. We grew up in rural America. We went to state schools. You know, again, we built a good, strong, resilient business, and we brought people with. I think I did a pretty good job of having a well-balanced life. You could certainly interview my kids to check that out, or my grandkids. And I'm glad I did that, because I think if you had to go start all over again and try to reestablish relationships, I mean, doesn't that sound hard? I was glad I worked hard on being a good spouse, parent, friend, as I did on working on building an enterprise. And I think people get lost in that sometime. And I certainly recommend that you don't work too hard, because I don't know that many workaholics that are all that happy. If you know yourself really well and you have good self-awareness, you'll realize that you're only good at 1 or 2 things. So play to those strengths. I'm a pretty good sales guy, and I'm pretty good at execution. On the other hand, we all have weaknesses, way more weaknesses than we do strengths. You should augment those weaknesses. Hire really, really well. If you get the right people in those spots, they will make you look better than you really are. People always say or ask, you know, what is the advice that you would give to somebody that was just starting out? My advice to that person would be, you gotta get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if you do what everybody else does and you don't have the hard conversations, you don't make the hard decisions, or you're not equipped to, if you're not decisive, then you know what, you're not gonna be a good leader. So I think if you're interested in being a leader, if you're interested in making a difference, you really actually have to get comfortable being uncomfortable in order to be effective.